Welcome to the Reproductive podcast, where we explore heterodox thoughts on politics, sex and culture with an exciting lineup of guests. I am your host, Dr. Petra Bueskens, and I'll be asking guests, what is it that distinguishes this political and cultural moment? Why isn't the world making sense anymore? What is reality in an algorithmically driven world? How can we regenerate our psyches and societies?
Hi, Jennifer. Thank you very
Hi.
Hi. Thank you very much for coming on my podcast as my drumroll first guest. I feel challenged and pleased that you would be in that role, in the guinea pig role. Thank you.
I'm honored. Thanks, Petra.
So I thought I'd read your bio first, and then we can get into the conversation that we've had a bit of back and forth. Okay, Jennifer Bilek is an investigative journalist who has tracked the funding of the gender industry for over a decade. She is the author of Dispatches from the 11th Hour, recently published by Spinifex Press, a platform highlighting the connections between technology, transsexualism, and transhumanism. Also, her research into the philanthropic backers of the gender industry has been utilised for legal briefs and platformed in myriad publications, films, and other media in the US and internationally. She has appeared on the Megyn Kelly Show, Stephen Bannon's War Room. That would have been a crime not long ago, but now it's the only place you can speak, isn't it? And James Patrick's Big Picture, and on various feminist platforms and podcasts. She has been featured in films such as No Way Back, 2023, Gender Transformation, 2023, and The Gender Delusion, 2023. Her work has been published in numerous books and magazines, among which First Things, Tablet, Human Event, The Federalist, The American Mind, and the feminist anthology Female Erasure. She recently published a collection of her essays with Spinifex Press entitled Transsexual, Transgender, Transhuman, Dispatches from the 11th Hour. And I added this to your bio. I discovered that you're also a very talented painter. And I did some...
Thank you.
For this interview. So I was thinking, she's got a doppelganger. This woman looks exactly the same. She's got a completely different thing going on. And yeah, it was nice to see a bit of internet history and see your paintings.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Yeah, I kind of miss it.
Mm-hmm.
But this is really, really important stuff. And so I just I stopped for a while.
Okay, so you're not painting
kind of a long while now. Probably
Okay.
5 years.
Oh, so you haven't painted at all for 5 years.
Right.
Well, you're a war journalist now.
That was one of my dreams, as a young person. I wanted to be a war correspondent. And so now I kind of feel like I am.
Yeah. Well, isn't it interesting? I mean, if you believe in intuition, some part of you knew you were going to be a war correspondent. You kind of are. All right. So, what I thought when I encountered your work, which as evidence of shadow banning, as I mentioned before, I didn't come across your work for a number of years, which surprises me given I'm in that space, both as a producer and as a consumer. So I'm on the Substacks. I've been reading in this space for years, and I come from, a feminist background where we were talking about this 20 years ago. So in fact, Renata Klein, who runs Spinifex Press, was my lecturer. So I've been in these circles for years. So it's interesting to me that I did not encounter your work until, 18 months ago, which maybe is evidence of my own head in the sand. But I think it's also evidence of, the fact that someone like you is being shadow banned. So what I thought was really interesting and original in what you were doing was follow the money. It's an obvious point, but I think because a lot of us in the space don't do that sort of work, it might be, analysis or culture wars or sprung from the postmodern head, like out of Zeus's head. There hasn't been the kind of critical work you've done around what is the political economy here, not just the ideas, not the conceptual economy, but where's the money coming from? So I think your research has revealed a web of big money, including governments, philanthropists, investment and accounting firms, pharmaceutical and tech companies, and bankers funding what we think of as, the transgender movement, which you have correctly identified as an industry embodied dissociation. Given your oft-cited follow the money methodology, can you outline who is funding this movement and why? And perhaps even why you came at it from that angle.
Well, it's a really big story now after a decade of research.
Mm-hmm.
I came at it. Well, I've, been a women's rights activist most of my adult life.
Mm-hmm.
I was also working for the health of the environment. And after Obama was elected the first time, I noticed this really intense sort of second McCarthyism setting in here.
Mm-hmm.
And, our first constitutional right here is free speech.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I was really, really alarmed by that because it was really bad. And another feminist, Megyn Murphy, was speaking out about this censorship in Canada, as was Jordan Peterson.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew that it was going on, elsewhere. It wasn't just here, but in political circles, it was really getting intense.
Mm-hmm.
And then, this whole issue hit the culture,
Mm-hmm.
the transgender industry. And
So
you couldn't really go anywhere and speak about women's rights or the environment and without encountering these activists, these very passionate, insightful, not insightful, but inciting activists at your venue. And I was like, what is that? And I wrote for Female Erasure, the anthology, Female Erasure, I think that was published in 2016. So I started to look around, to poke around, and look at why this was such a big deal. And, if you're an American, you just just go look for the money, because that's going to tell you a story really fast.
Yeah.
And it will cut through all the cultural stuff pretty fast, So there was a feminist, Mary Lou Singleton, who was speaking out about this issue in terms of, I think she's a midwife.
Yes, yes.
So in that circle, yeah. And she had mentioned Jennifer Pritzker of the Pritzker family had been funding the Palm Center and that he was a transsexual. And so my ears kind of went up, and so I poked around there and I found the Pritzker family, who is worth like $29 billion. There's quite a few of them. They made their bank on the Hyatt hotel industry.
Okay.
And now they're hair follicle deep in the medical tech industry.
It's a good analogy.
And they, Jennifer Pritzker used to be James Pritzker, fathered children, was married, I think, twice. And suddenly just announced to his colleagues and fellow philanthropists and I guess employees that he was a woman. He made an actual letter and said, I'm a woman now. And so call me Jennifer. And so he has a philanthropic foundation called the Tawani Foundation, which partners with Squadron Capital. And Squadron Capital is a capital asset management corporation that works with technology companies and medical technologies. And the Tawani Foundation funds has a branch that for human sexuality funding. And so he uses this organization to fund a lot of LGBT organization, a lot of LGBT issues. And so then I went further and further with the Pritzker family. Penny Pritzker was Obama's Secretary of Commerce. And she actually found him and pulled him out of obscurity and introduced him to all the, the heavy philanthropic funders.
Oh, she found Obama.
Yeah. Yeah. And she got him into the White House, basically. And he became the first trans president, right? That's what they call him, first trans president.
That's loaded these days.
Yeah. So, and, there's all sorts of corruption there too with the whole banking industry, with the Pritzkers. the meltdown of the banks and stuff.
You mean in 2008?
Yeah. And then, they played a big role in that. And J.B. Pritzker is Jennifer's cousin.
Right.
And that's Penny's brother. And he's the governor of Illinois.
Okay.
And
yeah, I think I
recently,
saw this.
and after the whole WPATH files dropped and the Katz report, and a lot of countries, European countries, started pulling back from the whole, medicalizing children and the medical assaults on children's reproductive anatomy. He went and made Illinois a sanctuary state for children who want to get these medical assaults on their reproductive systems. So they can go there. If you can get them across the state line, even if you're not related to them, they're safe. Nobody.
So let's say sanctuary in inverted commas. Yeah.
Absolutely. So, the Pritzkers, they're huge in this. And they fund, together. I mean, the whole family is involved in this. They're funding massive amounts of money, like millions and millions of dollars, to myriad universities across the United States, Canada, Israel. And these, cash-strapped institutions will take on this funding and along with that, LGBT ideology.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. But and it's not even LGB, is it? I mean, because there's the whole there. It's T.
No, but the LGB is very, very important.
Yes.
We can get to that, but
no,
they don't care about people with, stupid identities. They don't care about the LGB.
No.
This is all a front to get their ideology into the culture.
Mm-hmm. And essentially you're saying that's because, like, some people are saying, like Shoshana Zuboff in relation to the internet, lots of people are saying, we are now, the market has come for us. We are now that which is being farmed, or that which is being exploited, or that which is being harvested. And so in a sense, I mean, how I read you and what I found so powerful about your work is you're saying, they're coming because this is a new market and it's a very wealthy market.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, the other funders, let's talk about some of the other funders. I mean, it would probably be easier to make a list of people that aren't funding this, honestly.
Oh,
but,
gosh,
at the top, you have the media, you have Disney and Comcast and Condé Nast and Sony. You have the major tech corporations, Intel, Google, Microsoft, Salesforce, Hewlett Packard, Amazon. You have the banks, the major banks. Goldman Sachs had Ally Workshop a few years ago for men that wanted to be women.
Mm-hmm.
So
you're saying they're funding it or they're promoting it?
Well, they're, they have their platforms. They're, they give to the LGB. They do pro bono work. The 100 most powerful law firms in the world are doing all pro bono work. They've got platforms, sharing their support for the LGB. They give money, they give their time, they give work, help, assistance. And then you have the major philanthropists like the Pritzkers. You have John Stryker, who is founder of Arcus Foundation, which is probably the most powerful LGBT NGO in the world, and Guild Foundation, which is the second, or, they're really hand in hand because they know each other and they work together and their families work together. He owns the Guild Foundation. His name is Tim Gill. He's another billionaire philanthropist who comes out of technology. He sold his stock in Quark Press to fund Guild Foundation, and he turned the entire state of Colorado from a red state to a blue state. And he and John Stryker together got gay marriage passed. And so they used this political infrastructure that was used to pass gay marriage. They're now using that to promote gender ideology.
I mean, in some ways, that's the most pernicious dimension here, we see it happening in Australia too with the recent Tickle versus Giggle decision. It's the same legal infrastructure fought for by feminists or by lesbian and gay people to ensure that they were respected and have the same suite of civil rights, is now being weaponized against them. The very legislation that feminists fought for, that gay and lesbian people fought for, in many ways is usurping, displacing, and in the worst cases, weaponized against those very groups. in the case of women, it's clear.
Well, this is what capitalism does. It usurps anything that gets in its way. It's an absolute machine, and it just keeps coming.
Yeah.
It just keeps colonizing everything.
Yeah.
And anything that gets in its way is taken out or repackaged and sold back to people like this. Here,
Yeah.
this is the commodification at this particular front of what is actually transhumanism. What I call transsexual transhumanism is really the reproductive front of transhumanism. And this is part of the fourth industrial revolution.
Yeah.
We've been through steam power and electric power and computerization, and now we're entering a new paradigm, really, where we're investing in AI, artificial intelligence, genetic engineering, the melding of the physical, the digital, and the biological. And so this is the paradigm that we're dealing with now. This is what's happening. And, the technology corporations are all talking about this, the fourth industrial revolution. The West is talking about it, the World Economic Forum. And elites in this field of medical technologies are addressing this. This is what's happening. And they're so advanced at this stage, these technologies, that we have to be changed as a species. Our perceptions of ourselves have to be changed. And the society that we live in has to be changed to accommodate them. So this is actually what's happening here. People are being changed. They're being psychologically changed to consider that we are not whole human biological systems attached to the biosphere, which is our home and where we get our sustenance from. So this perception of ourselves is being changed. And transsexualism and transgenderism are the systems that are doing that change in perception. They're creating that change in our perception of ourselves and reducing us to compartmentalized commodities, our actual reproductive anatomy. So we're no longer whole biological sex systems, male and female. We are breasts, we're vaginas, we're penises, we're sperm, we're ovaries, we're hormones, we're genes, we're this, we're that, we're chromosomes, right? We're broken all apart, right? Which is very much what the medical industry does in general anyway. I mean, when I was a child, I went to the doctor, and you go to the doctor and that doctor takes care of anything that comes up for you, one doctor. And now if you go to the doctor, they'll treat you for nothing. They might give you some Tylenol, but that's about it. They're going to send you to a specialist, right?
Yeah.
For anything that goes wrong with you. So you're already broken into parts, right? And the system just keeps going and going and going. And it's not really one
apart,
person. Yeah. And it's not really, like people have said, oh, that's such a conspiracy theory, when I talk about these billionaires funding this agenda. And it's, I say, no, business is not a conspiracy. It just what it is.
Yeah. And
it's not the ones some monolith that's coming down on you that's making these decisions. It's business. This is how business operates.
Yeah. But it's interesting to call it a conspiracy theory when actually the receipts are all over the internet. I mean, you can look at where the funding goes. You can, that's the research you did. You're not presenting something you're hypothesizing or postulating. And so it's interesting. I mean, the same thing has happened under COVID, of course, but it's kind of, I think the shutting down of viewpoint diversity or even the facts, it's part of the machine. But I think you're right. It's like a shuttle bus. The transgender agenda is like the shuttle bus from where we are now to the fourth industrial revolution. And I think that's where your work is insightful. In fact, I was going to ask you about that because I think that in addition to the follow the money piece is the other dimension that marks your work off. You write and speak powerfully about the prevailing critique of transgenderism within feminist and conservative movements, stating they typically focus on only one part of the industry, the identitarian social contagion component, and, that in the therapeutic world that's associated with affirmation therapy and so on, or trans-identifying men in women's sports and prisons and toilets and, the safety issues around that. However, few understand it as part of a wider transhumanist project. And I think, I came to this intuitively and have written about it in a chapter in the book, hopefully forthcoming, a couple of years ago, but I hadn't seen that in the wider culture because that connection looked clear to me. And then I read your work and saw that you were saying, this is part of this kind of great unmooring from our sex bodies, from nature and from reality. So I got interested in this, this shifting of reality. And very few people are looking at it like that. It's all about the low-hanging fruit of the culture wars and identity politics. And it seems to me that is downstream from the funding and the paradigm shift. So can you speak to that specifically? And you did touch on it, but maybe a bit more about how you conceptualize transgenderism as in fact a vehicle for transhumanism.
Well, there's many different fronts of transhumanism. There's medical transhumanism, like Neuralink, for instance, putting a computer in somebody's head so that they can, if they're paraplegic, they can actually do things. They can speak and the computer will work for them. And there's artificial limbs that are absolutely extraordinary now because they have AI in the limbs that can learn and then, function.
And I think that was a good thing. I don't know about you.
Yeah, there's fantastic. I mean, it's so many different things, right? So, but there's so many different levels of different transhumanism and transhumanists, right?
Yes, absolutely.
They call themselves, they haven't really transcended humanity yet, but they're working on it and they're looking at all these different aspects. People are talking about this, but most of the mainstream media doesn't talk about this. They talk about the Kardashians. So most people don't understand this, right?
Yeah, that's right.
And what do they hear about in the media? They hear about LGBT, trans women or women, children born in the wrong bodies, men that just had this affliction that they just want to present as who they are. And this is what they hear about. And this is what they digest. And this is what they take in. And, LGBT, lesbian, gays, and bisexuals have been accepted pretty much.
Yeah.
In Western cultures. And, so this has just been tacked on. So it must be just another marginalized group. That's what they keep telling us, right? And then came the poor children born in the wrong body. I mean, they were just suffering, these poor little children. I mean, we had to help them, right? So people just bought it hook, line, and sinker. But, transsexualism, this fetish of adult men, of owning womanhood, seeing themselves as women. They want to own womanhood for themselves. And this is how they're aroused. Right? So they never had very much political power when they first came out, right? But as medical technology developed and all of a sudden they could make simulacrums of women's biology and men could possess these, they could buy these and wear them and pretend to be women. Now, this gave them a sort of currency, now they can really present as women. They can go out on the street and be as women, and then the medical technology got another bump, and they could give you drugs and make you look like, medical technologies, as they're coming up, the men that had this affliction are wanting more and more. In the same time, the internet is exposing these men to each other, right? So that they're forming coalitions, stronger coalitions, and supporting each other and sort of driving each other. Yeah.
That's right.
And so they gain more and more power. Yeah. And then so now medical technology is developing so that by, say, 2032, the technological reproduction market, along with surrogacy together, those will be in the hundreds of billions of dollars, the revenue from those systems. So now these men are being given social and political power to change policies that change our perceptions of ourselves as a species to make room for these reproductive technologies. They can now own women, actual womanhood, through reproductive technologies.
Can you tell those a bit, Jennifer? I wasn't aware of just how advanced some of this technology is. You were talking about artificial wombs not outside the body, but being implanted in men so that they can give birth and menstruate potentially. I mean, I don't know.
It's true. They're actually researching this. This absolute insanity. They are researching this. If they'll ever get to that Right? I mean, it's just so preposterous.
Yeah,
But you do have corporations and companies coming up that are exploring creating embryos like in a dish from skin cells.
from skin
So
cells.
from skin cells, yeah, and also genetic engineering. They just put a bill to the diet in Japan, which is a political party there, to regulate genetic engineering of babies. Supposedly it's going to be all ethical and stuff, but it's like, this is wild.
Yeah,
This is
absolutely.
wild.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, the technologies are really, CRISPR technology. The Jennifer, what's her last name? Doudna, I think it is, who was one of the women who created CRISPR technology to edit genes, said that after she did that, and it was exposed that this was her invention and stuff, she had a dream one night that somebody very, 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 very important wanted to speak with her. But she had to go through this whole labyrinth in a building to get to this person. And she was just like, she didn't know what this was about. And she had this sort of foreboding sense about it. And she finally got to the room where this person was. And the person was in this big armchair.
Yeah.
And they finally turned around and it was Hitler.
Oh,
Yeah, that was her dream.
Well, I mean, it is
totally
eugenics
eugenics
on
eugenics by
steroids.
another name.
And that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, and that's this whole kind of fourth industrial revolution. Like you say, there's potentially positive articulations of it, like a quadriplegic getting movement through limbs, but there's many different layers. And I think what you're identifying there is a pretty dark one. And I guess what she's feeling is something not unlike what Oppenheimer or some of them felt about the invention of the atomic bomb. It's like, what do you do with that? Where do you put an invention like that? He was earnestly trying to help his country, but of course, the minute it was invented, I mean, I think the film shows that very well. It's taken out of his hands straight away. He became overnight kind of marginalized and nobody in the establishment turned on him. And yet, what happens to this invention? Well, it's weaponized, of course. It is a weapon. And in a sense, this is not dissimilar. It might start with something to help. For example, a colleague of mine who has done a really interesting chapter on egg freezing said it started for women who were terminally ill and had cancer and wanted to have a chance at producing a baby in a short period of time. Like they might have 5 years. And, you can get into the ethics of that, the child losing their mother, but let's just say that's where it started. And now it's like almost a requirement for career women in order to be good neoliberal subjects to freeze their eggs. It's like, and what my colleague, Julie Stevens, says is it keeps being framed as a medical intervention. She said, but it's actually a social one. And it got me thinking about your point that when we talk about the trans child, you said somewhere in one of the many interviews I've listened to that this child is actually a victim of propaganda, and yet it's framed as a human rights issue.
Well, again, it teaches the public, especially the next generation, because they don't really care so much about us. We're going to be gone pretty soon, right?
Yeah.
But really, like any totalitarian system, they want the next generation.
Yeah.
They want to capture the youth.
Yeah.
And so they're teaching children that you can change your sex, right? They're teaching it in school. They're teaching it in the media. They're teaching it in anywhere children are.
Yeah.
They're teaching it to adults. So adults teach children,
Yeah.
that you can change your sex with medical technology. You can be created with medical technology. And, you look at surrogacy, this is already the first iteration of transhuman reproduction, in that you have 3 biological parents. You have the man who offers his sperm, the woman that offers her eggs, and the woman who gestates the child.
Yeah.
Right? No, they're not all genetic parents. They're working on that.
Yeah.
You have 3 biological parents, very invested biological parents, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's transhuman, that's post-human. That's nothing that we've ever seen before.
Yeah.
And people don't think about that when they're thinking about surrogacy.
No.
About, I have a baby.
Yeah. Or even the erasure of the mother altogether, like gay men having children. It's another really contested issue.
And this is under the LGBT.
Yes, yes.
Because these people will also, lesbian, gays, and bisexuals will need to have, artificial technological reproduction if they want to have their own children, especially men.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So I guess we're seeing this transformation of the culture, and that's ushering in this fourth industrial revolution. And I think what you're saying is the biggest sort of psyop, if I can use such a loaded term, is the transformation in our own perception of ourselves. I think this is getting more and more visible, and yet we're normalizing it. To think of ourselves as body parts, or to think on the medical intervention to have a child, that's all normalized. And what I hear you saying is that is part of the psychological operation here.
Absolutely. And to think of men as the mother, the creator.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Not Mother Nature, who actually nourishes us, and not, actual mothers who give birth to children. Those are being erased for the male mother.
Yes.
Male womanhood.
Yeah.
Technological womanhood.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think pornography plays a part here? It strikes me that the objectification of women is kind of really in the picture here in a less obvious way, but the normalization of the extreme objectification of women and reduction to body parts, again, orifices and actions rather than whole person in relationship, whole sexual being, whole non-sexual being.
Precisely. There's always been like naked pictures of human beings having sex, right? Even on cave drawings.
Yeah.
But, big shift in the 1950s when pornography became like it was invited into the home and promoted as something that was good. Like the man that consumed this pornography was a playboy. He was debonair. He was wealthy. He dressed nicely, right? He was a playboy. And he was entitled to women's bodies as parts for sexual titillation. And this was promoted as a good thing suddenly in 1950, right? The same time, like within a year of the first man leaving America to go to another country to get faux sexual characteristics of women, medical technological accoutrements implanted, and comes back to America and is celebrated as a woman in the media within a year of each other. I don't think that was an accident. I mean, now we're we're 2 generations on from pornography, and it just becomes more and more vile and violent, to the point where the sex is almost an aside.
Yeah, I agree.
The brutalization.
The brutalization is the key. Yeah, no, that's true. Gonzo porn shifted in some ways. It's sort of outrageous thing to say, but the 70s porn is almost wholesome by comparison. But the gonzo porn is just close up of, women's genitals and more orifices being penetrated by multiple men while being called names, and the roughness of it and the brutalization of it just seems integral to this recasting of women as body parts.
Again, it's a means of changing our perceptions of ourselves, making us hard, traumatizing us sexually so that we dissociate from ourselves. And for men, this is really impacting them in a way that they can't even sexually perform.
Yeah.
So it's another means of like sort of sterilizing men.
Yeah.
And this is now being perpetrated on children so that they physically dissociate. I mean, the first people to physically dissociate from their bodies are people that are surviving sexual trauma, right?
What do you say about children? Yeah, their exposure to pornography is doing that, you mean? I mean, there's...
Oh, yeah. Sure it is.
Yeah. Because, you hear that with the young trans-identifying girls that there's a kind of shadow in the text around not wanting to be a woman, because what are the options? I think Gail Dines said it 10 years ago, you're either fuckable or invisible, according to the logic of porn. And the kind of fuckable that they see, and sadly they do, because the average age of seeing porn is 11, is so scary and revolting that I can see that. I'm not saying it's the only thing. There does seem to be a kind of group think, and there's female psychology in the mix, the way social contagions happen, like and with girls becoming anorexics in groups and girls cutting in groups. And, there's something in adolescent female psychology at play here too. But I think, as with any of this, it's multifaceted and it comes together as a perfect storm. But the pornography piece,
it's all the same thing. I mean, if you're not respected, I mean, you're a young girl and you're a young woman coming into womanhood.
Mm.
Your body changes in a way that's very apparent. You grow breasts. The gaze is upon you. The social gaze is upon you suddenly.
Yes.
You're developing sexuality. That's like, whoa! If that's not respected in a culture, just think about what that does to young girls. It's like, wow. And of course, it's not respected and hasn't been respected since porn entered the marketplace and came into the home.
Yeah,
it's never been respected anymore. So of course they develop these eating disorders and these cutting disorders. And now this emulating male adult men with a fetish to own womanhood, This has turned into an industry now.
Such a sort of double, triple act. Can you speak about that a little bit? Like, because I think that that's psychologically very complex, but maybe you can speak about it culturally or psychologically, but this emulation of a male paraphilia that now seems to, because there's different groups, I mean, there's the trans-identifying men who are typically middle-aged and older often, like Pritzkers. But then there's this other group of quite young girls between the ages of sort of 11 and 14, as part of a kind of trans-identifying.
It's marketing. It's all over their social media.
Yes.
Other influencers, young women who've had their breasts lobbed off, who are taking testosterone, getting on TikTok, showing other girls how to do it. How cool are we? Putting men's boxers on, strutting around. This is so cool. This is so great.
It's like the violence of removing breasts is just gone.
Oh yeah. I mean, Chalaman is a young woman, and he's a model, or she's a model. He presents himself as a guy, he's attractive, he's deaf, he's an artist, and he's been all over the media as a model. Any major modeling agency, he's been, I keep calling him a guy. It's a guy, it's a girl, it's a woman, young woman.
Mm-hmm.
But, and he's, he has a girlfriend, or she has a girlfriend, lesbian, right? And it's really striking too, because they often are photographed together and they're very beautiful. Like he's, sorry, here I go again. See the confusion. It's insidious.
Yeah, if you're confused, Jennifer, everyone.
Right?
Yeah.
Right? She's posed for Tomboy X, which is an underwear company for boxers for women.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And they have her positioned with a caption that reads something about making this canvas your own. So her body is her canvas, and she's expressing her inner soul, her inner gender, or she's being creative with surgery and drugs. Yeah. And this is promoted. It's promoted in their music. It's promoted everywhere as a good, positive thing. And then you have, these people, like, what's his name? Bruce Jenner on the cover of Vanity Fair, getting all these accolades. Isn't he wonderful? Isn't he great? Right? He's on some talk show talking about how he raided his daughter's underwear drawer when she was out, like, ha 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 ha, and he makes a joke out of it, And it's like the media, if you look up, just say covers of transgender people 2021, right? If you just Google that, pages and pages and pages of all these different magazines, right? With people who want to disown their sex reality on the cover, promoting it as a positive, good thing.
Yeah. And
right?
then it's also saying to everyone else, especially young people, this is influential. This is how you get money. I mean, it's much cooler to be a girl posing as a boy than it is now to be a girl, or vice versa. Yeah. It is a rigor, isn't it? Yeah.
And it's all image, 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 image. There's no cultivation for children anymore about, for their characteristics, for their talents, for their skills. None of that. I'm learning a language. I'm great. I'm learning how to, I'm learning how to be an Olympic star. I'm learning how to speak a different language. I'm learning this. I'm learning that. You don't hear about the image, because the internet, the technology.
Yeah.
So it's all coming over the technology, and it's selling technology. It's selling your melding with technology, and it's coming over the technology. So it's really, really dangerous. It's so terrifying, honestly.
That feels unstoppable. I mean, I don't want to go too negative, but I mean, because like when you frame it at that dimensional level, it's the propaganda, it's coming through the technology and it's selling the technology, but it's hijacking young people's, I guess, in a sense, it's devastating. It's hijacking their pro-social qualities because they want to be seen by their peers. They want to differentiate from the previous generation. I'll just say psychologically, they are developmentally appropriate things for young people to do. They should kind of reject their parents a little bit. They should find out who they are. They should. And so this developmental, I mean, it is a quote unquote transition. And likewise, what you're saying about, I think one of the ways to offset this is to link kids to real activities, like theater and sport and, languages and music and, and I work very hard on this with my own kids. But I think one of the problems is they're sitting in a room on a screen and they're getting their social life from a screen. And that's where this then becomes, how do you perform for this abstract audience? And it's so unsatisfying that I suspect it's like people who eat donuts but are starving.
Absolutely.
And starvation. And so they
perform. Parents do the same.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. You mean the X's and boomers who are all over Facebook
together, right? They're all on their phones. Let's have dinner together.
Yeah.
And you have two-person household. Both parents are out working all day.
Yeah.
And you can't send your kids outside anymore because, that's unsafe. You can't just send them out to the world. They have to be going someplace to do something, organized, like, send them to sports or send them to this dance class or send them to, the jungle gym, with Sally and her kid. Right. But you never just let your child out into the natural world to learn life.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, John Haidt says that it's either screens or North Korea where it's all scheduled, but what I will say is as a parent who's living that now, there's no life on the street anymore for your kids. So one of the issues is if you say just get outside, they don't want to because there's no one there. And trying to get another kid who's available, who's not the parent's best friend or on a screen or, in the, hyper scheduled class structure, it is really, really hard. So I've opted for more scheduled as my solution to that. But it is a conundrum for parents because what we grew up with, which is that there were 10 kids outside and you were running around, that doesn't actually exist now. So it's very difficult to push back against it too. I mean, I say to other parents that I work with, like the savannah's gone, but if you can create a good zoo, that's where it's at. Like get 5 kids over in the backyard and then they can run around. And I try and do that as much as I can. And, but as for just outside, it's kind of a bit lonely for kids because no other kids out there,
And they're unsafe because there's so many more sexual predators.
Exactly. Because the pornification means, the most searched Google search in pornography is teenagers. I mean, that's already the restructuring of male sexuality. So I think it's interesting how you said, because it's not just women that get changed by the pornographic mindset, it's men too. So we know, and it always starts, the book is always good. The playboy, the well-dressed, the man with the good watch and the good suit. But then it sort of, it morphs and it's changed again so that now, almost men are in a role of being depraved and their sexuality hijacked, like you say, and are rendered incapable of performing with real women. Again, in my psychotherapy practice, I've seen multiple women say that, I don't want to get too X-rated here, but you can't perform unless I'm wax. You can't, and they're what it means is that the pornified ideal, which is essentially, a Barbie doll, adolescent with hyper makeup being brutalized, is the ideal that many young men now need in order to perform, which is kind of what you're saying. And that's the body parts piece, isn't it? And I find it interesting how there's a normalization of that look. That mascara with the fake eyelashes, I find, everywhere. And it's like there's very little commentary on it, that's now the look for young women.
Well, it's also like we're starring in a big psychodrama because, in the 80s when all these talk shows came onto the scene, like Jerry Springer and Oprah and, I can't remember all the others.
Dr. Phil, that was one we watched.
But, this was a platform. These were platforms that encouraged people to confess the most personal things about their lives, to bring it out into the public, right? At the same time that we're becoming a surveillance state.
Yes.
There's cameras, more and more cameras everywhere. You have your phone on you, it's listening to everything that you say and it's going to feed it back to you later, right?
Yeah, in the form of ads.
And the satellites are tracking your cars and your, where you go. And so there's really no, and the fringe, all the fringe of society, like the fetishes and stuff, are all coming to the center. Like 1950s porn is completely tame. And compared to like any music stage today, all the women perform in their underwear.
Yeah.
What happened to Patti Smith and Carole King and, Joni Mitchell? And, they all used to keep their clothes on and they had beautiful voices and were talented musicians.
Oh, I know.
Yeah, it's like you don't even have to be able to sing as long as you look good in your underwear. That's all it takes. Somebody else is playing the music for you. You run around and, do your antics and, you become a star.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Who's the other one that sang at the AFL recently in Australia? Katy Perry. And again, it's the undies and high boots. And it just seems that that's normal now because that Taylor Swift in some ways has set the tone, but it's in fashion too. I had this macabre fascination. I looked at Kanye West's girlfriend who happens to come from Melbourne and the clothing, it's basically undies on the outside. I was thinking of arachnids. There's some reversal where the flesh is on the outside and the clothes are going in. It's all diaphanous dresses. They're all see-through. It's not clothing anymore. It's actually not clothing.
There's no privacy is the point.
That's right.
There's no privacy. All boundaries are being evaporated because eventually we're all going to be living in a metaverse anyway. It's not going to matter if you abuse children or you abuse women because they won't really be hurt. You'll be in the metaverse.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah. Boundaries are being dissolved,
Yes. Yeah, they are completely. And what do you think? I mean, we've gone right off the question schedule, but that's good. Let's open it. Why do you think so few people are commenting on this? Because I think you're right. There's a number of thinkers who are challenging this and noticing it. Yeah. Whether it's the children or whether it's the loss of women's rights. Very few are looking at transhumanism, but I'd say nearly none are looking at the propaganda, which is leading to this paradigm shift, this recasting of reality. It's like people can't see it. Is that because we're swimming in it? I'm not sure. But this recasting of reality is the most disturbing of all because everything else is downstream from there.
Well, we're really isolated from one another. We live in we live in our bubble.
Yeah.
We don't really see what's going on. Most people see what's on the media, the mainstream media. And they have no idea what's happening to them. They're clueless.
Yeah.
I mean, even the people that are dealing with this issue are pretty clueless about what's actually going on. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just, wow. I mean, I've been banging on this drum for 10 years, things are changing somewhat, but it's taken 10 years and they're still not there. There's some more people, but they're not a lot of us, to
No.
see what's really going on here.
And
You
what do you
know,
mean by that? You mean that it's not an identity politics problem, it's a propaganda problem?
exactly.
Yeah.
It's a propaganda problem. This isn't a medical issue. This is a propaganda issue.
Mm.
Yeah. It's meant to change our species, our borders, and also the way that we perceive ourselves. It's eugenic. They don't see that. They see it as some sort of social contagion or some sort of social phenomenon or a medical scandal, which it is a medical scandal,
Yes,
but
but
it's become a medical scandal.
it is those things, but they're downstream. So
Exactly.
how did you arrive at that? I'm assuming it's looking at the following the money, but are you also seeing, like, I know there's transhumanist researchers, David Hughes is one in academia, although I think he just lost his job. But they're looking at what some of the earlier organizations like the Bilderberg Group, whatever, what they put to paper, the Agenda 21, Agenda 2030, and so on. Are you saying, like, can you refer to some of that? Have you researched some of that and seen that this kind of what you're calling the erosion of our boundaries and our sense of our own humanity was in there?
Well, when I happened upon Martin Rothblatt, who is a man who fancies himself as a woman,
Yeah.
and has synthetic simulacrums of women's biology implanted in himself, and he also calls himself a transhumanist. He's a tech nerd or entrepreneur, like your pick. He's also very, very accomplished in the fields of technology and medicine.
He's a lawyer
Had
too.
yeah, he's a lawyer.
Mm.
Had a biopharmaceutical corporation that he ran for quite some time, and as a that worked on the Human Genome Project at the UN level, basically, evaluating the ethics behind it, changing the human genome. And he has a xenotransplantation farm, which is, growing animals, pigs specifically, to use their organs for humans to be implanted into humans. He's written,
For what purposes? If you have a car crash or something, and you need,
you have cancer and you need a new set of lungs, boom,
okay,
you get a
yeah,
pig lung.
mm-hmm.
Hearts, same thing. Got a heart attack, no help for you. Your valves are shot, get a pig heart. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And
He has a 3D. Sorry?
Are they compatible? Doesn't our immune system?
I don't know how well that's going. I haven't checked recently.
Okay.
I know somebody died
Okay. Yeah.
not too long ago.
There you go.
He has a 3D organ printing company. He has a religion called Terrorism, which is a technological religion. He believes that they are making God with technology.
Yeah, AI.
He is very, very invested in AI. He has made a robot of his wife, which he's supposedly instilled her consciousness into the robot.
I've seen that clip. Yeah.
And he believes that AI is basically humanity without skin. And he's a co-founder of Sirius Satellite Radio and a lot of other things. And he's, he really moves around in the culture in the higher echelon of the different stratospheres of the culture, like the medical industry, technology industry, the LGBT, et cetera, and he actually wrote down his ideology, transgender ideology, or actually wrote it down.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes.
He has a book called From Transgender to Transhuman.
Yes.
And if you read, it's a really short book, and it's really, he calls from a lot of different movements, feminism being one of them, queer theory being another one, the Black civil rights movement. And he calls a lot of different pieces from these different movements, and he sort of forms his own ideology out of that, which is basically a business model for body dissociation.
Which he defines as liberation, of course, from the skin.
Yes, of course he does. And these people, I mean, they really believe it. Sort of like Hitler believed what he was doing was a good, positive thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah,
a lot of people believed Hitler. A lot of people believed Hitler.
Yeah.
And the propaganda was pretty dense.
Absolutely.
And a lot of people believe these tech nerds that we are going to be living in some sort of technological utopia. And, the technologies, I've got to say, they're pretty frightening. They really are.
And it's not presented to us as a choice. This is what I find interesting, or even something to negotiate. People will say, Elon Musk has developed Neuralink. Here's an example of it. But there's no kind of, where are we bringing in the philosophers and the ethicists to say, well, this might be okay, but it might not be. And we did used to. I was teaching in the university sector in 2006 when the surrogacy issue was there. And lots of people were writing and talking about the ethics of it. You would have read it in the broadsheet newspapers. There were journal articles. There were artists that, remember that, I can't remember her name. You might, the artist who did the image of the pig as human, and she was, the female pig human was breastfeeding. It was confronting and grotesque. And she was trying to make this point, and yet now there's no discussion. I mean, maybe that's because we're all kind of hijacked on our screens, and that's part of it. But there's no discussion. It's as if all of it's just marching along. And yet, where is the, hang on a minute, I want to pull the curtain down and have a conversation about this before the next act.
I remember watching this platform of a bunch of transhumanists speaking about the different developments. And it was very, very interesting, and they were all like sort of, just getting so charged up about all the developments and stuff. And, on and on they went. And it was like really a long conference. It was like over an hour, well over an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was like 5 people in it. They were just going back and forth and back and forth. I was like, and then not one of them mentioned any of the things that you're talking about. Like it was all about charge, like, just getting charged off the discovery and the creativity and the, and where it's going. But never about, well, what about the harm?
Yeah.
What about the harms to society?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like that's almost become taboo. And because of the, mass culture of cancellation. And as you say, I mean, just to loop back to the very first question about the Pritzkers and the strikers and so on, when they're funding cash-strapped institutions and then their agenda goes in, this is what we're now seeing the consequences of. And that's often mistakenly assumed. Even I assumed this until, a couple of years ago, that postmodernism changed things. And that's where the early, say, Jordan Peterson or some of those people were talking about. I still remember when I first encountered him. And he was in an interview with Camille Paglia. And, he was really saying that postmodernism and the university had created this. And I saw it back then. That was a very niche discussion, the category of woman. I wrote my final term paper on it, and how the postmodernists were deconstructing the category of woman. And, what does Derrida know? Let's go back to Griot, blah, blah. But that's, I'm seeing now, it's obvious, but that's so downstream of the funding. We just assume that these people who had these positions were all meritorious, notwithstanding Camille Paglia's devastating critiques about how dumb they all were. But still, actually, I mean, I started to see the way that academic jobs were. You couldn't just be a scholar of, anthropology or philosophy or something. You had to be a scholar of, and then they'd say, I still remember that happening. It happened from the early 2000s. You had to be a scholar of intersectionality or of technology or of, you had to do crip theory, not critical theory, but, crip theory, a theory for crippled people. And it just got more and more absurd. And I remember thinking, wow, a terminal degree is not what it was once. You had a terminal degree in a discipline and it didn't matter what you did your dissertation on. You just went and taught that. And then you would attract students, but then they started to say what you had to do. And no one talked about that. And I found it really discombobulating. And then we got a grant scheme. And I remember saying to people back then, this is the early 2000s, but hang on, that's the whole point of the ivory tower. But because elites turned on elitism, which is an absurd paradox, of course, but they all, were like, that's elitist, the ivory tower. And I said, no, that's like the separation of church and state. It's really critical. So academics can make mistakes. And so they have freedom of speech. And so they're not dictated to what the research agendas are. But I still remember when the Australia Research Council came in, and to get any kind of academic promotion, you had to have had one of these grants. And if you go into the grant scheme, there's like 5 things you're allowed to write on as a social scientist or in the humanities, sustainability, equality and diversity and equity. And I was like, so what happened is everyone who had any kind of brains or critique, they got siphoned out. They got removed. And so everyone in there now, not everyone, I'm talking in generalities, but most people in the jobs now in the culture industries are on board because, in a way, like Chomsky said about manufacturing consent, they're already, that famous interview, you wouldn't be here asking me this if you didn't already tacitly agree to the whole agenda. And so we're really in a crisis because we're shadow banned and no one listens or even has a chance to read it. And you're a bigot. So this is, I think, a real struggle. I mean, your work is amazing and it is getting out there, but it's very difficult. It's like the public sector disappeared.
Yeah. And then these organizations have formed to cull people from the university who get into these, programs and create these ideas and expand on them. And they take them and they put them into, they train them for political positions, like the Victory Institute. That's their whole thing. They cull people from the universities to take political positions as lesbian, gay, and bisexual and transgender people, right? And they put them in power in order to change policies.
Mm-hmm.
Like Rachel Levine comes out of the Victory Institute, for instance, just, off the top of my head.
Yeah, right. Oh, okay. I didn't know about that, but it makes sense. And do they seduce them through big pay packets or just power?
I presume they hey, we're going to train you for a political position, a big time political position. You're going to be, you're going to be top dog. You're going to be Secretary of Health through this, the LGBT, which people think is really progressive. So the money comes in there and the money goes out from there as well.
What do you mean? Can you elaborate on that point?
Well, like, the really, really rich people will invest, like, let's say Mackenzie Scott, for instance, Jeff Bezos' ex-wife, right?
Is she a TV personality?
So many millions of dollars. No, she's a philanthropist.
Okay.
Maybe she's a TV. I don't watch TV, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either.
She's a TV personality. But she's a philanthropist now.
Mm-hmm.
And she's spent millions and millions and millions and millions of dollars on the LGBT, right? As has so many other humongous philanthropists. So it goes into the LGBT, right? These NGOs.
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes out to these other little NGOs and these organizations that have been set up in the culture to deal with children's education. That's GLSEN, for instance, in the United States. It's different for each country.
Yeah.
And then you have GLAAD, which takes care of the media realm.
Yeah.
So GLAAD goes into the schools, GLAAD goes into the corporations and tells them how to speak about this new type of human that's not quite male or female. They're a new species of human. Yeah. So they teach people how to talk about this in the media. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have, and so it comes in big, vast sums at these LGBT NGOs, the big ones, the big kahunas, and then it moves out into the smaller, like the little rabbits that are growing and proliferating all over the place, right? Yeah. And the medical institutions and the gender clinics and the schools and these sexuality centers. So then the money keeps going out and flowing out into the culture in order to change perception.
Yeah.
And then you have a scoring system. So you have like the Human Rights Campaign in the United States. So this is like the DEI policy for LGBT.
Yeah.
So if you get on board with our $4.3 trillion consumer base and our ideology,
did you say trillion?
We're going to
trillion,
$7 trillion. If you get on board with our ideology and our people, then we are going to send our constituency to your shop, to your company, to your bank, to your this, to your that. And you are going to get a high mark. So if you're a corporation, they got a whole corporation section. They got a health a health section. They got, I forget all the sections that they have to score, So if you get a high mark with the LGBT, now you're progressive and you're good, and we will send our marketing base to you.
Yeah.
If you don't get on board, we will financially devastate you.
Yeah. There's not an option to not be on board, is there? I mean, that's an important point to make. You'll get amplified if you're on board, but you can't say no anymore. It's kind of like the Godfather. We'll give him an offer he can't refuse. I mean, essentially, it's
not like the Godfather. It is the Godfather. It is the mafia. It's the mafia. It's the new mafia.
Yeah.
And, and in 2014, North Carolina wanted to hold on to their sex segregated bathroom in schools. And so in 2014, they wanted to hold on to their sex segregated bathrooms, right, in schools.
Mm-hmm.
And they took the NFL games out of there. They sent them to South Carolina. The technology companies all came out. All the major technology corporations came out and signed an amicus brief that said, basically, if you don't get on board with this agenda, we are taking our money out of your state, which amounts to trillions of dollars. You are going to be so screwed. So, and Obama sent in his little missive in, that you better get on board with this. And so they were terrorized, and this is how it's done.
Yes, yeah. Did they get on board? Yeah. I'm assuming they did.
I think they got on board. I can't remember what the ultimate result is now. I can't remember.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so much stuff going on out there. I don't remember that one. But
yeah.
What's another example of that? I'm trying to think. But anyway, so this is how it's done, basically.
Yeah. And the law too. I mean, I just wonder, how can they all be in agreement? The feminist movement literally took several centuries. We think it was just from the suffragettes, but no. Mary Wollstonecraft was talking at, the French Revolution time, and there were quite a few before that. And it took a long time, the civil rights movement. How quickly has this happened? I mean, I feel like we were talking about it in kind of radfem circles, after Janice Raymond's book, but let's say starting to notice, like you said, around that, 2010 to 2014 period. Then you had the sort of people who were saying, we can't talk anymore, the freedom of speech issue, Jordan Peterson, 2016. That's when I became sensitized to it within that idiom as opposed to the radfem one. And yet in that time, the entire culture has been transformed. There's not like 2 centuries of political activism took place. And that's what I try and say to people who assume naively that it's just the next human rights movement.
Well, it was added to the LGBT political apparatus, Arcus Foundation and Guild Foundation in the early 2000s, right? So this is when it began, being infiltrated into the culture. But it really hit the ground running in 2014 when they had a grown man on the cover of Vanity Fair in his underwear, and a woman's underwear, I should say, the pinnacle of masculinity. What was he, a triathlon winner of at the Olympics? Bruce Jenner.
Yes.
Here he is in a woman's corset on the cover of Vanity Fair, and then you couldn't get away from this issue after that. The following year, it was Laverne Cox on the cover of Time magazine, which is owned by Mark Benioff, who also owns Salesforce, massive, technology corporation.
Right.
Who, if you just go to their front page, they'll tell you about the fourth industrial revolution and all of the disruptive technologies that are coming at us. And, we don't even know how humanity is going to be changed through these disruptive technologies and economies that are coming at us. But they're coming at us full force. So they're talking about it. They're telling us, and they're changing us in the process because they have to. Otherwise, we're not going to adapt. It's not going to be, possible.
Yeah.
To have these technologies and function as a society. I don't think it's going to be possible anyway. I think we're going to have a massive meltdown. Already, now we're starting to see the people are being really disrupted. I mean, even the people that were just kind of we'll just go along with this. It's a fad,
Just at the time, I don't know how long you're happy to talk for, but I didn't want to go over what feels okay for you, I wanted to ask you about language still and maybe new sort of political alliances, but I'm very interested to ask you about that. I might cut this bit out. But are you okay to keep talking, or do you feel you need to wind
Yeah,
up?
we can go on a little bit longer.
All right. Okay, great. Thanks.
Sure.
So what you were saying then, I think, is very interesting. Can you speak to that point a little bit more about
I forgot what I was saying.
Yeah, no, I reckon I've still got them too. I've got menopause brain. You were saying that the funding comes in, it uses the LGB apparatus, and then you were giving examples of technological change and how it's not working. We're going to have a meltdown. I was interested in both
Yeah. People are
technology.
getting pissed off at this whole, what people are calling transgenderism, and they're getting pissed off, like how it's impacting their lives. And how could it not? I mean, like you said, everything else is downstream of them changing society and language. Everything is downstream of that.
Yeah.
The minute you call a man a woman and you insert this into the law, into the culture, and into the market, this is now going to disrupt everything, because our societies, our lives are organized around biological reality,
Yeah.
around reproductive sex, because this is how we reproduce the species. It's at the very core, the very root of who we are as a species. So if you're going to attack that reality, you're going to have massive fallout in the culture.
It's ontological violence, isn't it? It's ontological violence. We can't say who we are, and we can't organize our lives around reality. And so that's really hard. And I think, what's interesting here, Jennifer, is that I said long ago, why can't we just have a third football team or a third toilet? Now, I don't know where you align with that, but I'm okay with that.
I'm not okay with that.
You're not okay with that.
No, that's exactly what they want. That's exactly what they want. They want a third category of human being. They want to. Gender rights are really just rights for augmented humanity. For the
so you think that was the ultimate rationale for them? Is that what you're saying, or are you saying
for the gender rights? Absolutely, yes.
See, I think that they had an independent set of agendas, but my sense is that it's now been hijacked. But I don't know. I can see your point. Like, I'm not saying I'm advocating for the transformation of humanity, but I just wonder, there's never the possibility of a third, like, putting identifying men in their own prisons rather than in women's, or in their own football club rather than in women's. That's all I'm saying, because it's erasing women, and it's damaging women's capacity to be in
their men
life.
I don't care how they identify. If they identify as kangaroos, are we going to start building prisons for kangaroo men now?
Yeah.
And what about the ones with diaper fetishes? Are we going to start putting adult changing tables into, corporate bathrooms for their fetish too? And what about the furries? Shall we build litter boxes? Doggy balls?
Yeah. Okay, I take your point, and I ultimately agree with it. But I thought politically that could be a compromise that meant we didn't have women feeling unsafe in prison.
No, can't compromise here. We can't compromise with biological reality. No. No, they're men. They're men and they're women. And that's that. Period.
Yeah.
Exclamation point.
Well, all right. I see your point, and I agree with it. Ultimately, at the level of reality, I agree with it. And so I think, if we've got this transformation happening at the level of law all over the place, and most people then are too intimidated, they're restructuring our reality that doesn't actually reflect reality. Okay, because as I can't remember who said it, but reality bats last. Yeah, so nature bats last. There's no way in which but the reality ceases to exist. What we then have is a culture in a psychotic state.
Exactly.
That seems a damning point to end on. I don't want to end on that. It's too dark.
I mean, we're kind of like, we're in the cult phase now. Once you take this ideology and you insert it everywhere in the culture and into the market, more importantly, because the market will just take off with it in a way that, you could change laws, or you could, regroup in an organization, but the market just the market is global.
Yeah.
How do you get it out of the market once you put it in there? It's in there now. So
Yeah. And we are the birds.
but this is a cult because people are disowning their biological reality, their relationship to the natural world,
Mm.
Which is reproduction, reproduction and death. That's what we have.
Yeah.
So they're completely denying that on a mass scale. This is a cult. And they're supporting, promoting, and celebrating castration. So this is a castration cult. However, once you let that go and you just let it proliferate, now what you're going to have is a virtual reality. And speaking of Martine Rothblatt, as we were, he's also written about virtual realities.
Yeah.
And he was also mentored by William Simmons Bainbridge, who is now, I don't know if he is still, but he was head of the Human Cyborg program at the National Science Foundation, which funds most of the science research in the country. And so William Simmons Bainbridge was really, really into studying cult. He's also into transhumanism and cyborgs and AI, and obviously at the Human Cyborg program at the National Science Foundation. And he mentored Martine Rothblatt. And Rothblatt has, written about virtual realities and also the technological future of reproduction. And he's not the only one. I mean, he's very, very pivotal because he sort of brings all of it together. Do you know what I mean? And he wrote about the ideology, and he also crafted the law. And he made a religion out of it. And he created the legal structure for augmented humanity, which they call gender rights, which have morphed into all the gender bills that we have all over the place. So, I mean, you got to hand it to him. I mean, he's a pretty clever guy.
Oh, yes. So this restructuring of the human, I've heard you in my week of researching your various output. You were also talking about, and I really agree with this, that biological sex, and by that sexual dimorphism, but also the act of sexual intercourse is what reproduces life. And it's that's being fragmented. I think it's interesting that our miscarriage rates are up. Men's sperm count is at a catastrophic low. I mean, there's lots of different reasons for this: toxicity, vaccines. We've got lots of stuff going on there, but we've got this agenda as well. And so just at the moment that, the kids are transing, men's sperm is collapsing, egg freezing is on the rise. And that's by no means guaranteed. It's presented as such, but actually the woman who was on the cover of Time, that Korea woman, all her eggs died. They can't just be implanted. Like this whole idea that we can just, like you say about the implanted pig heart, a person died. It's not straightforward. All this trying to perfect Mother Nature doesn't actually work. We're perfect as we are. Yeah. And so I just think it's interesting that this colonization of human reproduction, there's a lot of other things. Some may be coincidental, some engineered, but where our fertility is collapsing at scale now.
Well, it's kind of a self-perpetuating cycle, this whole capitalist machine. There's this great Lakota saying, I don't know which Lakota person said it, but I know it's a Lakota saying that says, the further we go from nature, the harder we become. I find that very, very profound statement considering everything that we're living right now. The further we come away from the connection with the biosphere and each other, the harder we become. So we become inured to life, and then we look for the fulfillment in the machine, that it can't give us. We're always like seeking more and more and more, like an addict. Basically, we're a bunch of addicts running around.
I agree.
Until we unplug and recognize this about ourselves and get our bearings back. And, that's what we can do. That's what we can do. People ask, what can we do? What can we do? What can we do? This is the machine. Well, unplug the machine before you can unplug the machine, because we don't know what's going to happen. They don't know what's going to happen.
Are we being hypocrites because we're having this conversation through the machine? I mean, this is really tricky. I do my banking in the machine. Like I want to unplug, and I do for large stretches of probably every day in order to write, but I'm writing at a computer. I'm outside in the garden, and you heard my chickens and, there's kids, but so much of our lives now, from banking to travel plans to communication, paid work, education. I mean, I'm not telling you anything you don't know. I don't mean just to rehearse stuff, but I mean, yeah, it's incredibly difficult. And where one goes, like I still remember when I went off Facebook about, 5 years ago, again, reading Rushkop and Zubot and all that Team Human stuff around, this was supposed to bring us all together, but actually what it's done is splinter us, and we're depressed now and alienated. But I then went on it all, and I missed multiple party invitations. People were like, what's happened to you? As if something had happened to me. So if you're not visible on social media now, I went off Twitter because I just saw it as a culture war that might one day turn into a war, because it literally earned money from polarization and conflict. That's its business model. If you go off there, it's sort of like I was saying about my kids. There is no one on the street. You have to curate the zoo, but there's no savannah left. If you go off altogether, and I gave it a good go, it's pretty lonely out here. You have to basically then create your own Amish world, and I didn't have the time. So
which is not a bad idea, actually.
I agree.
But I mean, I was speaking to a few people on a platform recently about the intersections of this system, this transhumanist, transgender, transsexual system. And, some of the themes that came up in terms of helping ourselves was tell stories, save your books, hoard books, and tell stories. We have to bring ourselves back to an oral tradition.
Yeah.
Because that's how history is. That's how history is preserved, through oral storytelling. And also, I had shared a story about that I had seen on the internet. Well, there was two, actually. One of them was parents who had decided, they wanted their children to get more comfortable with interacting off of line. So they got together with their friends' parents, and they all structured a getaway for them for, like, I don't know how many weeks it was, several weeks. And they all went away together. And the thing was that they weren't allowed to use technology while they were away. And so they did it. And they came back with some really interesting experiences. And the other one was this, in the Netherlands, there is this program starting, and they move around from like country to country. And what they do is they have a meeting, like lots of people can come into this cafe, but you have to leave your cell phone at the door. You can bring in a book, and, you can eat there, and you can, whatever you want to do, but you have to leave your cell phone at the door. And it's like 2 hours long. It's like, but this is what people have to do in effort to detox. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
people are thinking about it. They are thinking about it, and they're moving it, they're moving. Who knows?
Yeah,
what
I send my
we don't
son to
know.
a camp like that where there's no
Oh,
cell
that's cool.
phone. There's no
That's
parents
great.
allowed either, but it's great. It's all kids, and often it goes for 4 days, and that's in a big property, and it's fantastic. And yeah, I'd ultimately like to do it on my own property at some point. I was thinking about like having an internet portal that said this is a portal to the real, because so often it's the real going into but having it, and then you've got to write to a PO box and then come to this sort of care permaculture farm. And I like that idea. Like the ARG was on that model, the alternative reality game, where people would go in, but they'd have to meet in real life. And there's a few series about that. And I think that could be quite an interesting kind of subversive way of doing it. All right. There was one other question. Oh, well, there were lots of questions I want to ask you, but for today, maybe we can do it again sometime. But there were two things. One was, I find what's so refreshing about your writing and in talking to you too is you use accurate language. So I noticed, again, even amongst those of us who are, awake to this, there's still, saying trans women, not trans identifying male, or talking about, gender affirming care or gender surgeries, whereas you use language much more like, I'm quoting you now, synthetic simulacra of women's sex biology. You'll say it's a castration cult. And so I wanted to ask you about that, because you've clearly I don't know if you're doing it consciously, but you've made a decision to use language that I think keeps us in the real. And of course, there's always a choice of language, and that's also politically aligned, the way you speak, the way I speak. Nonetheless, I think that you are keeping your language in alignment with reality, and you're doing it quite explicitly, and that's now a politically subversive act. So I was wondering if you could speak about your conscious choice of using language like medical assault on the sex body, synthetic simulacra of women's sex biology, and so on. They're also great turns of phrase, by the way.
Thank you. And thanks for asking that question. I think it's really it's probably the most vital question that you've asked in the whole interview,
Mhm.
i- in my opinion, because that's how important I think this question is. That
Mm.
you have to. This is a totalitarian system that's transsexual, transgender, transhuman conglomerate. It's really powerful, and it's very totalitarian. And we have to expose it for what it is. And if you invest in it linguistically, I mean, that's how it came at us, and that's how it's deconstructing everything with language.
Yeah.
So, and that destruction is us. The destruction is our core, our biology.
Women or humanity?
So,
Women or humanity?
both.
Yeah.
Yeah. Women are part of humanity. It's but the sexual front, the transsexual, transgender aspect is the reproductive front.
Mm.
So women are first.
Yeah, that's what I meant.
Online.
Look that women weren't humanity, but yeah, it's not so focused on men, even so-called trans men. Yeah, go
Yeah.
on.
But when women go down and children go down, men go down with us. They don't realize that yet, but
No.
that's what's happening.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think that it's really, really very, very vital to use accurate language to expose to people what's happening. Also, it can get you by the censors when you say, because you can't use the word in the negative. You can't say, a man when somebody's telling you he's a woman, right? But you could say a man who's adopting synthetic simulacrum. Now, people don't want to do that because it's like, oh, nobody's going to understand what I'm talking about. But it says what you're talking about in the language that you're using. So you don't have to explain it.
Yeah.
You're just lazy and you want to just get to where you're going faster. You want to throw on the brake.
Yeah.
I mean, put your foot on the gas. You don't want to stop. You don't want to think about new language. You want to just get there and communicate what you want to communicate. But it's like you're screwing yourself. You're just putting bricks on top of, solidifying the idea that there's another type of person.
Yeah.
There is no other type of person. There's a man and there's a woman.
Yeah.
Or a boy or a girl.
Yeah.
That's all there is. And if you have a condition, which is also being hijacked and utilized,
intersex,
a disorder of sexual development, that's just being used to sell this ideology, to deconstruct humanity. It's just a disorder of sexual development. Other people have, other disorders of their of humanity. They're born with one leg or 6 fingers, or we don't rearrange reality for them.
No.
We deal with it.
Yeah. Yeah. And we're not discriminating against them because we're not rearranging reality around them. I mean, that's where the political slippage is and where the propaganda comes in. Because we don't want to rearrange reality around a fetish, it's getting, run together with bigotry. And that's the real problem that we face. But I think your use of language is quite powerful because, again, I even see people on the sort of contrarian or heterodox or whatever you want to call it, gender critical feminists, sex realist Christians, they're still sometimes using the terminology that we've been gifted as part of the propaganda package. And you're not. And I like that. You remind me of C.J. Hopkins in that way. He's really powerful writing, challenging the sort of COVIDian mindset.
Oh, he's extraordinary.
He's extraordinary.
He's great.
Yeah,
he's
absolutely.
Extraordinary. And Carrie Dansky is another feminist who wrote this book, I can't think of the name now. She's gonna
Yeah,
kill
I
me,
know, I
but
know
it's
it
such a
too.
good
And
book.
yeah, I can't think of it either.
Abolish sex or don't, it's something about, sorry, Kara. But anyway, she wrote this fabulous book, and it really it goes to the heart of this matter, in dealing with this in the political arena, this language thing, and just, using accurate language, how important it is and how relieved people are when you start to do that,
Yeah.
like so many people that are in this arena, um, fighting this, they think they're not going to be clear. They think nobody's going to understand them. But when in actuality, when you start talking about reality, people are relieved because it's like what's going on doesn't make any sense. So it's like
No.
if you start making sense, it's like, oh, can I say that?
Mm. Well, that's
it's
part of the reality gaslight that's pushing this along quicker than people can even think. Because it's a gaslighting of reality itself when we have to use language that doesn't properly convey a fundamental truth too. It's not like, is this mauve or is it purple or is it lilac? I mean, we're not kind of, yeah, it's not in a nuanced space where subjective or interpretive positions are important.
If you change the language, for instance, if people just stop saying like trans people or trans identified people, right? And they just said people that are attempting to disown their sex. I mean, how much different is that, right? That's the reality, right? We're trying to create human rights structure in law for people that are attempting to disown their sexed reality. In other words, their humanity. How do you create human rights legal structure for people that aren't human? And why would you want to if people are just having a problem of dysphoria? What? Like if you just give this the barest minimum amount of conscious, reasonable, rational, common sense law, it just falls completely apart. So you have to reclaim language. It's so important.
Yeah, I agree. Well, that's what Peterson said early on that was so vital in his message. And because, feminists couldn't hear it because he was critical of feminism. And that was a real mistake because I think the brilliance in his point was when you lose language, you've lost the culture. And he was ready to go on a hunger strike for it. And I understood that this was a man who understood the problem. I have deep respect for his position because
so do I.
Yeah,
so do
he
I.
was saying you must keep the capacity to speak truth, to power, but just not even just for the sake of it, because of what it does if you can't. And it's so complex. We can't even grasp what it does to the culture, but I think we're starting to see it.
Now we're starting to see it.
That's right. We're starting to see it. But he was a canary in the coal mine saying what happens downstream of this is essentially, we've got what I said before, kind of a culture in psychosis because we no longer have a grasp on reality. And that's why I think your insistence on that is quite important. And I think it's also emboldening for all of us in the space that we do that for each other because we have to hold that space together in some ways, which is you holding that helps hold it for me to write into that space and for other people to write into that space. So the other thing I wanted to ask you about, and I'm not sure if you've got an opinion on, but of course it's pretty salient in the US at the moment with the elections coming, these new heterodox alliances that are forming. I'm very interested in that. That's what my anthology is looking at, and I'm writing a chapter about, or the introduction, where you're seeing disaffected lefties join together with people on the centre right, join together with, post-liberals, join together with, traditional Christian, and I think this is really interesting, but it seems to me that the people most put out by it are old school lefties. In other words, probably your old peer group and mine. They seem most upset about this. So, many of us in this space and certainly in the COVID contrarian space literally lost all their friends or lost key people up to and including family members. This is really deep and hard in the culture now. And I've felt it in my own life too. But on the other hand, you see these, what I consider politics is, which is talking across difference. Remember, that's what it was once 5 minutes ago, but now, yeah, ideological. Yeah. Remember? How do you interpret these new, more complex alliances emerging? What I'm calling a kind of heterodox politics.
I think they're fantastic because I think that it's sort of forced this rupture in this tribalism that's been there with identity politics, and also this sort of solidification of a right and a left, like this hard line, and you can't cross the line, But now this especially I think this issue and the whole COVID crisis is really, it's rupturing that tribalism. And like through this issue, I was as tribal as anybody, especially about my feminism. Probably 15 years ago. I'd say 15 years ago, I was as tribal as any feminist could possibly be about their feminism. And I was probably a lot looser than some people, I always fancied myself, very appreciative of the analysis, but, I wasn't going to wear it like a noose around my neck, I always appreciated Camille Paglia for that.
I was just thinking, me too. I always had a secret. I had multiple secrets. Classical liberalism was another secret I had.
She really helped, loosen it up. But, it was still like really, really tight after that. And this whole issue blew the doors open. Now it's like, look, this is one lens to look at the world. It's not, it's not the whole thing. It's not the whole thing. It's not.
Absolutely. And also, I've come to see as well. I probably always saw it because I was reading Paglia from the beginning like you, but it was easy to lose that. There's a whole lot of unintended consequences too of anything, including feminism. So, the empowerment discourse and, because I have multiple hats working as a therapist, how empowered is a single mother 10 years in, for example? Is it better to stay with someone who's less than perfect than end up alone? And, those sorts of questions around what does it mean to be empowered or to have a family or to not have a family. And I still think feminism is a vital part of that discussion, but I now see it as one thread in multiple threads, including points of view that are actually anathema to feminism. To me, they're also interesting and important.
Yes.
And I think the real thing is to make up your own fucking mind. Excuse me. But, where you go, okay, the Christians are good on this bit. Every culture that's Christian has human rights. That's not a coincidence. It directly comes out of that. And the traditionalists are good on this because they recognize boundaries and heritage and the importance of family structure. And the feminists are great on this because they said, hang on, but what if your husband's an asshole? What do you do about that if you're being bashed up? And creating women's community. And actually this whole idea of the woman at home is an invention of the Industrial Revolution. Women were working always. And, feminists were important for putting that stuff on the agenda. And then you've got the post-liberals who say, yeah, but the liberal social contract is a problem. We're not all equal anyway. And, to me, I'm bringing it all in. It's like this soup I'm brewing like a witch,
It's a good development, right? I'm making friends with people on the right, I still have friends on the very far left, and I have friends on the far further end of the right. What?
Did we Hitler's in your dream?
No, not like that. But just because we disagree on significant issues doesn't mean that we can't be compatible and have friendships, rich friendships even, and support each other in other ways. I find relationships like that are more open to difference, far more enriching than I do, closed relationships. Like, you're a feminist, and if you're not voting for Kamala because she's a woman, she's not a black woman. I was going to say a black woman. It's ridiculous. She's not black, but she's Indian. Just for the record.
Yeah.
A lot of
everything,
leftist
yeah.
feminists are out there going, we have to vote for Kamala. It's just because otherwise, Trump, is going to destroy the world. Just like, are you kidding me? The guy never, he never created a war when he was in office, right? He didn't create a war in office. He was probably the only, politician in how long that didn't,
Well, it's difficult to
you
say,
know?
but I mean, it's the enemy of my enemy is my friend. I think that's where a lot of us sit with that. I don't know if you listen. There was a fantastic conversation between Ann Bauer and Trish Wood on this. I'll send you a link. Why Ann Bauer, lefty journalist, is voting for Trump, and her position on this. And she talks about his position on war, but also Trump being objectionable, but the deep state who are just putting in misinformation bills and erasing the category of woman and imposing health measures that are contested and contestable.
And what offensive speech.
And so how can anyone awake to that go sign on to that? And anyway, so it's a great discussion. I'm not an American, but I think you would find it really interesting. I found it interesting as I think of us as a kind of third cousin of the American. The US.
Well, my friend, Joey Bright, also another feminist in America, just did a couple of podcasts with women who've left the left.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
They're going to vote Trump. That you just did a couple of segments.
Oh,
they're very interesting to listen. Yes, I'll send you both links. You did part 1 and part 2. Just a bunch of women speaking about why they're leading the left.
Yeah, yeah.
It's fascinating.
Yeah. Well, that's the same as the Trish Wood Ann Bauer conversation. Sounds very similar. Yeah, okay. Look, I feel essentially, I think what you're saying there is accurate, but obviously it's very triggering to people who are solidly in one camp, but it's much more triggering to the left who are policing these mantras of, trans women or women or any of the other mantras that are being policed now that are, what is CJ calls them? It's not his quote, actually, it's someone else's, but thought terminating cliches. I like that. The thought terminating cliche is kind of what sits behind propaganda. It's often this, reassertion of the same statement, trans women or women or the public health measures stuff, and then you can't question it. So I agree with you that the heterodox alliances are really exciting and they're offsetting the tribalism. I mean, there's that, it was on YouTube a while back, it's probably still there, but Republicans and Democrats in the 60s sort of fighting fiercely and then going and having a game of golf, that it was normal to be able to actually chat and converse with and have dinner with your opposition. Maybe not at the heat of the, fight of the election, but generally speaking. But I think because this, as I conceptualize it, there's a paradigm shift at the root. We're no longer compatible at the level of the priors, the philosophical priors, the sense of what is a human being, for example, or how do we live. The tribalism has actually gotten a lot worse, is my sense. So now we are true outliers to be able to connect with the opposition. Yeah. And I think Tucker Carlson said this a while ago. Sorry, left friend, and I thought he was actually.
Doesn't that funny that you have to apologize for that? You've done some of the best reporting in the past few years.
Oh, unequivocally. Yeah, I mean, going and speaking to Putin, but yeah, all his interviews, they're fantastic. But the division is no longer left and right. It's who's on the side of truth and reality. Now, of course, you could say every movement has always thought they're on the side of truth and reality or on the side of God. So that's not something we can't critique or have a self-awareness around or self-critique. But I think the deeper it is that there is some fundamental division happening where we find ourselves over here with a group of people we weren't in alignment with only 5 years ago, let alone 10. And it's actually around this reality piece and this, what is a woman, or, if there's viewpoint diversity, how do we explore that? Jennifer, is still there?
But earbuds just went. I'm so sorry.
Oh, that's all right. Well, maybe that's our point to stop, because we've been going literally 2 hours. It's amazing. It feels like 5 minutes. It's wonderful.
It was really good. It was really rich.
Yeah.
I remember the name of Kara Dasky's book. It's The Abolition of Sex.
Great book. Yeah. I've actually got that on my list of Amazon books.
That was just like, it was like sitting there on the tip of my tongue. I just had to find, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Before we ended the conversation, it would have driven me crazy all night.
Well, yeah, I don't feel like a professional podcaster at all, given you're my first, but they always say, we'll put all the links in the show notes. I don't even feel like I have a show, but yep, I'll put all the links in the show notes. And I'd like to, I'll leave that one.
Let's hope this is the launch of something really big.
Yeah, let's hope. Fingers crossed.
I hope so.
There'll be lots of shadow banning, but yeah, let's hope.
It was wonderful.
Yeah, thank you. It really was. I might reach out to Kara Dansky. Should be good to have on. I'll read that book. It's been on my list. Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer, for coming on. Thank you for your
It was a pleasure.
groundbreaking work. I mean, really, I think you're the leader in this field. And yeah, I hope to stay in touch and keep the conversation going in different ways. And I really appreciate your time.
Please.
Thank you.
Thanks.
All right.
Okay.
I'll finish up now. Bye-bye.
Bye.